Okay. May our learning tonight be a merit that we should get all of our hostages back soon, quickly, and as much as possible in good health. Bezrat Hashem. Welcome, everyone, to journey through the books of the prophets, continuing with Shmuel Bet, the second book of Samuel. We are in the 19th chapter. We actually left off there last week. What has just happened is King David's son, Avshalom, rebelled against him. And as we will see, Yoav, the general of David, even though King David told everyone, do not harm Avshalom. He had hoped, despite the rebellion, to reconcile with his son. And he gave strict orders that no one was to harm him. But in the end, Yoav kills him. And we left off last week that David hears this and he begins mourning. So in the beginning of chapter 19, so very poignant. It says that Vayivek v'ko amar b'lechto b'ni Avshalom b'ni Avshalom mi yiten muti ani tachtecha Avshalom b'ni. So here we see David is really crushed. And he's calling out to his son, B'ni, my son, Avshalom. He said, would it be that I would die and in place of you? So this, it takes a very, very big neshama. Someone rebels against, okay, it's his son. We can understand that a parent to their children. But here, Avshalom would have killed David and try to take his kingdom from him. And yet David says, would it be that I would have died and you could have lived? And David begins very, very deep mourning here. And Yoav, the one who killed Avshalom, comes to David and gives him rebuke. And basically says, I and your whole army just risked our lives in order to save your kingdom, to save you and to save your kingdom. And the one who led the rebellion is now dead. And you've turned it into this period of mourning for everyone. And he rebukes him. And as we said last week, for those who are here, when we get to the end of this class, we're going to try to understand deeper the relationship between David and Yoav and who Yoav was. It's not a simple relationship here. So here we see that, remember, David is the king. In theory, he could have had Yoav killed. He disobeyed an order from the king. And here on top of it, Yoav comes and gives him rebuke. So obviously we see Yoav is an extremely strong person. And David listens to him. And David comes down from where he was mourning, and he comes and sits in the gate. And the word comes out that David has returned to us. He's not isolating himself. So we're continuing with chapter 19. And now there's a bit of a confusion. Well, is David king again? It's true, Avshalom is now dead. But in the meantime, many, many people backed Avshalom. And here, what we're going to see play itself out in the next chapter or two is something that I've explained already, is that at this point of the development of the nation of Israel, the tribal alliances, the tribal loyalties were still very, very strong, very strong. When the tribes needed to get together to fight a common enemy, they would get together. But there was a lot of rivalry between them. And here, what happens is that David sends word to Tzadok and Eviatar, the Kohanim, who remained loyal to David, asking, where is everyone from Yehuda, my tribe? If we remember, David first was king over Yehuda for 7 years before he became king over all of Israel. But again, this shows you that for those 7 years, he was king of Yehuda, but not the rest of Israel. So here, David is saved. The rebellion is over. And David is asking, well, where are all the people from Yehuda? They should come to me and accompany me back to Jerusalem as a sign that they are fully behind me. And at the same time, we see that the people of Israel are also confused, and they do, in a certain way, a bit of tshuva, and they realize that, okay, we chose some of them to follow Avshalom, but David has been saving Israel for like decades, and a little bit of what's called cheshbon and nefesh, soul accounting, that they had turned away from David, and now they realize David was the one who brought Israel together, made Jerusalem the capital, expanded the borders. Things were going well. And so what happens now is everyone is trying to kind of come back to support David. And at this point, 2 people show up. One is Shimei ben Gera. Shimei ben Gera is from the tribe of Benjamin, and he's from the house of Shaul. And when David was leaving Jerusalem, if we remember, he came out and he cursed David, threw stones at him, and cursed him. Here again, we'll see the 2 people who came back. There was still this idea that Shaul was the first king, and maybe his descendants should be the true kings of Israel. So this is something that David had to contend with his whole life, really. So Shimei comes back and he apologizes and he begs for forgiveness. There's some of David's followers who wanted to kill him on the spot for what he had done. And just like the first time where David let it go, he didn't enforce the power that he had. And he, in a way, accepted that Shimei would not be harmed. But later we'll see what happens when he is literally on his deathbed, and the different instructions that he gives to his son, Shlomo, Solomon, who will be the next king, as far as Shimei. But at this point, he doesn't do anything to him. And then Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is the son of Yehonatan. Yehonatan and David were like brothers in covenant. The love and respect between them was a shining example. As we've learned, that it says in Pirkei Avot that it's the example of love that is not dependent on anything. It was just pure love. So Mephibosheth is the son of Yonatan, and David was, and Jonathan died with Shaul, and David took care of Mephibosheth. He, even though he was somewhat weakly, his legs were lame from the time he was a child, and David took care of him. And yet, when Absalom rebelled against him, Mephibosheth started.
Breakfast.
Okay, 1 second. I have to mute people here. I got to do that.
We can call Uncle and maybe go 1:30.
No.
And bring him some fush. Make
1
a
second.
pastrami sandwich.
Here we go. Okay. Sorry. I forgot to mute everyone. Okay, continuing. So here, when Avshalom rebelled, Mephibosheth thought, oh, maybe this is an opening for me as the descendant of Shaul, and maybe I could become king of Binyamin and the rest of the tribes. And now Avshalom has died, the rebellion is over, so Mephibosheth comes back and also asks for forgiveness. And David, because of his love and loyalty and friendship with Jonathan, also allows him to come back without doing anything to him. So here we see that a number of examples where David takes the advice of Yoav is really more rebuke, and two other people who had cursed him or connived against him, he also lets them free of any kind of punishment. And then one of his best friends, whose name was Barzillai, Barzillai. They were friends for almost ever. And Barzillai was a great supporter of David. He ate at David's table. He had many chances to see David in private, and he knew him, as a very close friend. And so now, again, David is trying to come back to Yerushalayim. So he says to Barzillai, come with me. Let's go back like to the old days. You'll eat at my table. We'll take care of your family. And Barzillai says, I'm 80 years old. I'm getting on. And I need to stay in my home with my family. I want to be buried here in my city, my village. And he says, I'll stay here, and David accepts that as well. So here we see time after time, David is kind of just going along with everyone, trying to compromise, trying to let everything kind of return to normal. And then we're still in chapter 19. We're getting towards the end of chapter 19. He is now coming back to Yerushalayim, and now Israel, all the other tribes, they're trying to show their loyalty again. And now they're saying, well, why are you showing special honor to Yehuda? What about us? So here again, you see this rivalry going on. And so the men of Yehuda, they simply say, well, David is from our tribe. It's natural that we are the main supporters of David, and that's why we're stationed close to David like we are. And Israel didn't accept that so well, again, because of these rivalries. And they're saying, well, we're like 10 parts of Israel. And here we're assuming the other two parts is Yehuda. And even though it doesn't say, it's probably the Shevet of Levi. But here they're saying we're 10 parts, and yet so much of the power behind David is because of Yehuda. And so what happens is, because of that, a person named Sheva ben Bichri, so he stands up and he says, he blew his shofar and says, what part do we have in David? We'll go our own way. And here we could see this is like the seeds of what happened after Shlomo dies. It's not that long ago. Here should be mentioned, David is getting towards the end of his life. Here, we're actually not that far from the end of Shmuel Bet. And so not that long later, after Shlomo rules for 40 years, then his son takes over. But then we'll get to that in the book of Kings, but the tribes split between 10 tribes in the northern kingdom and 2 in the southern kingdom. And interesting enough, the 2 were Benjamin and Yehuda. And that was the original rivalry, because Shaul was from Benjamin. But in the southern kingdom, they were the 2 tribes and the other 10. But here we see the seeds, because that's what Sheva ben Bichri says. Like, what inheritance do we have with the son of David? Excuse me, with David, the son of Yishai. And so he leads another rebellion. So David has barely made it back to Jerusalem to reconstruct his kingship. And now there's another rebellion. So David does make it back to Jerusalem with those who are supporting him. And 2 things happen. One is, if we remember, one of the horrible things that that Avshalom did on the advice of Achitophel. Achitophel was the very close advisor of David, who threw his weight behind Avshalom. And he gave Avshalom the advice that when David fled Jerusalem, he had left his 10 concubines. And Achitophel says, go in and have relations with them. This will be like a sign to all of Israel that this rebellion is for real. Avshalom is going to be king, and David's kingship is over. This was like a symbolic sign. So when David comes back to Jerusalem, it simply says that he took care of his 10 concubines for the rest of their lives, but he never had relations with them again. And then what happens is David, again, we see a lot of compromise happening, a lot of attempting to kind of put the pieces back together. So when Absalom rebelled, so he gathered people around him and he started to form an army. And so his general was Amasa. And here we see David is upset at Yoav. Yoav has killed his son against orders, and he replaces Yoav with Amasa. Now here he's taking the general of his, call it his enemy's army, and making him general of his army as a way of trying to, like, okay, what happened, it's over. Let's move on to another chapter here. And so David instructs Amasa to gather an army within 3 days and go after this new rebellion, after Sheva ben Bichri. So what happens, though, is, according to the Talmud, it says that after 3 days, Amasa had not done what he was supposed to do. The Talmud gives him the benefit of the doubt, and they say when he went to gather this army, people were learning Torah, and he didn't want to bother them learning Torah. So he didn't gather the people in time. So now Yoav, who has just been replaced, so he's not like in exile or anything, but he's just not the general anymore. So Yoav, he wants to end this rebellion. He's still loyal to David. And that's some of the mystery of Yoav. He's loyal to David. And it turns out Amasa is a nephew of David, but so is Yoav, from different wives, from different sisters. And so Yoav catches up with Amasa, and he says to him, "Brother, how are you doing?" And it says that he took him by his beard, which was considered like a friendly thing to do. In other words, to kiss him on the cheek, which was customary to this day. And when he did that, though, he took a sword and he killed him. So here, Yoav again, this is the third person that we see that he kills under questionable motives. And now Amasa is dead, and Yoav just takes charge, and he goes after Sheva. He's leading a rebellion. So what happens is Sheva comes to a place called Beit Ma'acha, and he's kind of holed up in this city, and Yoav knows that. And so he, by the way, we're in chapter 20 right now, going back to the beginning of the rebellion. Beginning of the rebellion, we moved into chapter 20. So Yoav is now surrounding the city, and he's going to attack it. So it happens now. It says that a wise woman came out of the city and spoke to Yoav and said, basically, why are you going to come and make a war with this whole city? And Yoav said, that's not my intention. My intention is, right now, the leader of the rebellion is in your city, and I need to end the rebellion. And to end the rebellion, I need to get to Sheva ben Bichri. And so the wise woman said, let me deliver him up to you, and let's spare a war in this city. There's no need for it. I will deliver him. And what happens is she kills Sheva and takes his head and throws it over the wall as a sign that the rebellion, the leader of the rebellion, is no longer, and that will end the rebellion. So, first of all, it doesn't name this person. It's a wise woman. Now, what's interesting here, this is the second time that we see Yoav having interchanges with what the book of Shmuel is calling a wise woman. In the first case, we don't know who she was. Here, we don't know who she is either, but there is an opinion that this is Serach bat Asher. Serach bat Asher, she was a legendary figure. And she was the one, according to tradition, when Yaakov was in a state of mourning for over 20 years, thinking that Yosef had died. And he couldn't get over it. One of the reasons he couldn't get over it because deep down inside, he didn't accept it. But on paper, it looked like he was dead, but he couldn't get over his mourning. And so according to tradition, either for a long time during those years or right when Yosef had revealed himself to his brothers and sent them back to tell Yaakov that Yosef is alive. And they were afraid, and even the text says that he almost had a heart attack when he heard that Yosef was still alive. And Serach bat Asher, she was chosen to sing to him and plant the seed that Yosef is still alive. So that's how she became legendary. And because of that, Yaakov blessed her to have long life. And one of the opinions in the Talmud is that this wise woman was Serach bat Asher. And she was also responsible for helping Moshe find the body of Yosef when they left Egypt. Because before Yosef died, he made the tribes promise that when they came out of Egypt, they would bring his body and bury him in Israel. And so on the night of the killing of the firstborn, when everyone is getting their provisions together to leave in the morning, Moshe is running around trying to find the body of Yosef. And according to tradition, it was Serach bat Asher who knew the secret of where he was and how to raise his body so it could be taken out. And it was. And then he was buried where he is to this day, in outside of Shechem, Nablus. Shechem is Kever Yosef until this day. And so one of the opinions is that's who this wise woman is. The only thing we have to consider here is this is approximately 500 years after Serach bat Asher was living. She was alive when the Yaakov came down with the tribes to Egypt. And then we were there for approximately 210 years. We came out, and this story in Shmuel Ben is happening 300 years after we get out of Egypt. So it's approximately 500 years later. Nonetheless, she is a little bit like an Eliyahu Navi kind of figure, a very mysterious, how she could have lived that long. Nonetheless, there was a tradition that she was blessed with long life. So with the killing of Sheva ben Bichri, that ends the rebellion. So here we've dealt with two rebellions against David. He had ruled for almost 40 years without rebellions. Here he's getting towards the end of his life, And there are two right in a row, two rebellions right in a row. And chapter 20 ends with just a list of who are the main ministers in David's kingdom. And the first one, it says, Yoav was over all of the army again. So, and then it continues that Benyahu, one second. One second. Benaiah ben Yehoiada, he was called the he was called like an advisor, and he becomes a very, very important advisor to Shlomo HaMelech. According to tradition, he's buried right outside of Tzfat, for all practical purposes, part of Tzfat. That's where he is buried, according to tradition. And Sadok and Eviatar, who go all the ways back to the story of Nov, when David was running away from Shaul and he took refuge there. They are the Kohanim, and excuse me. So before we go on, this would be a good place for discussing about Yoav and David. Excuse me. So some of this will be review, but we want to look at this whole picture here. Again, Yoav is a nephew of David, and that explains some of the forgiving ways of David, because it is family, and it's hard for him to come down on family. But we see that if we follow the whole story, Avner 3 different times kills people really against David's wishes. The first time is when Avner, who was the general of the son of Shaul. Remember, David is now king of Yehuda for 7 years, but Shaul's son ruled in Israel. And Avner was his general. And what happened was that Avner slept with one of the concubines of Shaul after Shaul was killed. And the son of Shaul was very upset about this and gave him rebuke. And Avner, at that point, was so disgruntled, and he also saw that David was on the ascendancy. And so he switches sides. He sends a message to David saying, I'm ready to be loyal to you, and I'll bring all of Israel with me. And so David says, come, we'll discuss it. Avner comes and he says, I will be loyal to you, and I will bring all of Israel with me. And David says, okay. Before, though, there were skirmishes between the followers of David and the followers of the descendants of Shaul. And in that whole, those battles, so the brother of Yoav, Amasa, so he chases after Avner, and Avner even says, you know, let's not fight. Let's just end this, go home. or if we have to fight, let's fight another day. But Amasa, who was the brother of Yoav, wouldn't hear of this. And he went after Avner, and Avner killed him. One could say it was in self-defense. Others say that he could have just injured him, and because he was much stronger than Amasa, he could have injured him, and that would have ended it. But he killed him. And so obviously, Yoav was nurturing this hatred for Avner. So when Avner comes and professes that he's going to follow David, so it's not clear what his motivation was. One was to take revenge for his brother, and the other one possibly was that he didn't trust Avner. Like, how do we know that, Avner just came to David's stronghold? Maybe he was coming like a spy. Maybe he's now going to go back and assemble an army. So here, it's not clear. It's not clear if he was actually being loyal to David by killing Avner, or he was taking revenge for his brother, or some combination of the two. Then we see that he killed Avshalom, strictly against his David's orders, and even gives him a rebuke afterwards. And it's really quite amazing that David, he replaced him with Amasa, and then Yoav kills Amasa. But in the end, right where we ended here, David makes him, he's still the general. So it's a very complicated thing. One of the things we can understand, as we saw here, David had reason to punish a whole lot of people after the rebellion. But instead, he just let things go. He even appointed the general of Avshalom's army to be the head of his army. And so David, along with everything else that David was, here you could see his political savvy. And he understood Yoav is a very, very, not only strong person, but a successful person. He led many of the wars that David was involved with, and he was very successful. And he was with David from the beginning. And even when Shaul was chasing David, Yoav was already with David. Now, David was, let's call it the underdog at that point. So, and they were blood relations. So Yoav was really very loyal, but we see he had a very independent streak running through him. Another interesting thing here is it was Yoav who organized for, one second. Give me 1 second here. Okay, for the husband Uriah of Bathsheba, remember David's attempt to cover up that he had been with Bathsheba and she's now pregnant from him. He tried to cover it up, and he sent word to Yoav to put Uriah on the front lines, and Yoav carried it out. So in a certain way, David like owed Yoav. But there's an interesting, it's either a Talmud or a Midrash. Here we see Yoav is implicated in a good number of killings here. And the question is, how did he get away with it? So this Midrash or Talmud says that he was brought before the Sanhedrin and he was grilled. And each one of them, he had, we'll call it an excuse. He had a reason of why it was legitimate for him to have killed these people. Even though it seemed certainly to be, especially with Avshalom. With Avner, David didn't know about it. And the same thing with Amasa. But about Avshalom, he gave clear orders. With the others, Yoav just acted. And nonetheless, before the Sanhedrin, first of all, we have to understand to be found guilty of murder in a strict Torah sense is very difficult. Very, very difficult. You have to be warned in advance. There have to be two witnesses, no extenuating circumstances. And so in each of these cases, he was able to convince the Sanhedrin that maybe he wasn't completely guiltless, but he could not be found guilty under Torah law for what he had done. So that really complicates this story very much. Before, many, many chapters ago, it says in one sentence, it says that David did justice and charity for the people, and Yoav was his general. So the question is, why are these two things put together? And so one of the commentaries says that David was able to do justice and charity because Yoav was fighting his wars and helping him establish his kingship that allowed him to be the dispenser of charity and justice. Now, also, if you look at the book of Tehillim, David is constantly talking about his enemies from the surrounding nations, and his enemies from within Israel. Some of that we've discussed, but even tonight's class, we see that there were always people who didn't accept David as king. That this goes all the way back to the whole idea, was David even Jewish? Because of the whole thing of the relationship between Ruth and Boaz. And that because Ruth came from Moab, and it says in the Torah that someone from Moab cannot convert. And there was a disagreement for generations. Does this apply only to the men of Moab or to the men and women of Moab? Boaz gave his legal opinion that it only applied to the men. And so, of course, he married Ruth, who was a convert from Moab. And from Ruth and Boaz comes David. And so when Doeg, he was many chapters ago, he spread the rumor maybe David isn't kosher. So David had to contend with this his whole life. His whole life, he had enemies within Israel. He had enemies outside of Israel. And here he needed people who were loyal to him. And Yoav was there from the beginning. So we can understand why, even though there are many, many different reasons why David could have permanently gotten rid of Yoav, but he didn't. And in a certain way, other than that he was a blood relation, he actually needed him. It was part of his, we'll call it political savvy. Now, I'm going to add two things that we haven't learned yet, but probably in next week's class, that David wanted to take a census of the people. And Yoav comes and says very respectfully, not in a rebuke way, but very respectfully, like, now, why do you want to do this? You don't need to do this. You're putting yourself in danger's way. You're putting Israel in danger's way, because there's a whole thing about how you have to take a census and how you count people. And Yoav was saying, like, don't get involved. But what we'll learn is David nonetheless commanded him to be in charge of the census. David had his reasons why he wanted to count the people. And Yoav went and did it. So here again, we see this kind of strange relationship, and very, very hard to read Yoav's true emotions and true motivations. And one other thing that we will get to is that David has to contend with one more rebellion from another son of his, Adoniyahu. This really is only in the beginning of the book of Malachim, but we're not actually that far from it. And Yoav follows Adoniyahu. So that we'll have to get to. So I'm only bringing it up because if we're trying to get a whole picture, we still have a couple more incidences. But here we see a very, very complex family, political, complex situation between David and Yoav. Okay, we have time for chapter 21, and this will do fairly quickly. That right at the beginning of chapter 21, it says, then there was a famine in the days of David for 3 consecutive years. And David, when there were questions like, why is this happening? In other words, if I know why it's happening, I can make a tikkun. We can fix it. And so he would ask the Urim V'Tumim. Sadok was his main, was like the Kohen of that time. And God reveals to him it was because of what Shaul had done to the Givonim. Now, there's a whole question, well, why wasn't there a famine in the time of Shaul? Shaul only ruled for 2 years, even though the story is fairly, seems very spread out over many years. He actually only ruled for 2 years. And in those 2 years, he really did 4 different things that were very wrong. One was that when he first became king, Shmuel told him that they were going to gather together and he was to wait until Shmuel came. And they were going to offer offerings. And Shmuel didn't come when Shaul thought he would. And the people were getting restless. And so Shaul didn't wait for him. And then with Amalek, the war he fought with Amalek. He kept the king alive, and he kept the cattle alive. And because of these two things, he lost his kingship. But also, he wiped out the city of Nov. That was the city that gave David really refuge for one night. And he went and he killed everyone from Nov. But the part that we didn't know is the Givonim. The Givonim goes back to the book of Yoshua, where this tribe from outside, actually from inside of Israel, they pretended that they were coming from outside of Israel, and they wanted to join the Jewish people. And Yoshua went along with it. And then it turned out that it was a fake, and they really were from Israel. They were just trying to avoid going to war with Yoshua. But Yeshua and the elders of the tribes had promised the Givonim that they wouldn't be harmed. And Yeshua felt that he had to honor this pledge. But they were made like water carriers and woodcutters, meaning they were somewhat servants of the Jewish people. But they weren't harmed. And at a certain point, Shaul broke this pledge, and he killed a whole lot of people from the Givonim. So that's what David was revealed to him. It was because of these many sins of Shaul, but especially about the Givonim. So David sends to the Givonim and says, what can we do for you to fix this up? It's true that Shaul, harmed you, killed many of you, but I want to fix it up. Here again, we see David trying to make peace. And in short, they basically say, we don't want anything from you. We don't want to harm anyone, except we want like as measure for measure, 7 of the descendants of Shaul, from the whole family of Shaul, we want to execute them. And David goes along with it. And he hands over these 7, and they are executed. So I want to mention here, and by the wise woman who cut off Sheva's ben Bichri's head in order to stop that rebellion. And the question is, in Jewish law, and this came up in the story of Shimshon, that according to Jewish law, if, let's say, an enemy surrounds a city and says, we'll take the siege away, but you have to turn over 10 Jews. The law is you can't do that. You can't do that. But what happens if it's a specific person and they have a specific reason for asking for this person? Then you're allowed to. And this happened in the story of Shimshon. The Philistines came to the Jews and said, we know that Shimshon is hiding with you. Turn him over. If you remember the story, Shimshon had convinced the Philistines that he was not acting on behalf of Israel. It was like a private feud. And so when the Philistines came to Israel, it was just like, we're not suspecting that Shimshon has been fighting us for you, but we know that he's hiding among you. So turn him over and we won't fight you. And they did. because according to Jewish law, in that kind of a case, if that person would cause, many people to be harmed or killed, then you could turn over that specific person. But if it's anonymous, you can't. And so here, the wise woman, so she went according to that kind of legal thought, because Yoav was just saying, we just want Sheva ben Bichri, and we'll leave everyone alone. And so she went along with it. And here, David, in a certain way, goes along with it also, because here, this situation has to be worked out. There's a famine for 3 years. And God is saying it's because of this whole situation. Not a simple story, that's for sure. Not a simple story. So after these 7 people are killed by the Givonim in revenge, so David though makes sure that they are all brought back for proper burial. And at that point, Shaul and Yonatan had been buried somewhat temporarily. If you remember that they had cut off Shaul's head and nailed it and him to the walls of Beit Shan. And then some very loyal people, they snuck in there and they took the body so they could bury him. But here, David now wants to give him like a permanent burial in the tribe of Benjamin and Yonatan. And so that's what happens here. Obviously, David was not really happy with this idea of turning over these 7 people in order to end the terrible situation here. But as king, he had the right to do it. The king had a lot of power, and here he used his judgment that this is what he had to do. And one second. Okay, this is a good place to end. We're in the middle of chapter 21. So I'll just mention again that on the merit of our learning, and what's interesting is there's quite a bit of division in Israel once again over what we should be doing about the hostages, what we should be doing about the war. And here tonight we learned about the divisions in Israel, the rebellions, even when David became king again, between Yehuda and the other tribes, like who's more loyal and who gets to be closer to the king. So unfortunately, these kind of energies are still very present. And that's what makes learning this, it's very real. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but what we learned tonight is very, very appropriate for the kinds of energies, and especially over like who's the most loyal to the hostages, who's the most loyal to what's good for Israel. And there's just a lot of opinions. I'm not commenting on my own opinion, but in all cases, we should be able to end the war by defeating our enemies and returning our hostages as soon as possible. Welcome everyone to Insights into the Weekly Haftarah. For those who have been following the 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, we read 7 consecutive passages from Isaiah, Yeshayahu, and they're all of consolation. They all have the theme of consolation. They're not following the theme of the Parsha. It's more the theme of after Tisha B'Av, the Jewish people need consolation. And of course, the first one is Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Console, console my people. So this week is the third of the 7. The Parsha is Parsha Ra'eh. And the reading here is from the book of Isaiah, from the 54th chapter, the 11th verse, to the 55th chapter, the 5th verse. It's a relatively short Haftarah, actually one of the shortest. Last week was quite long, and most of the other ones during the year are long. This is a relatively short one. It's full of consolation. It's full of prophecies of redemption and the future redemption and Mashiach. So I just want to pick out 4 different verses here that are important to notice. So one of them is the 13th verse of chapter 54. And the reason it's important is, at least in Nusach Sfard, this verse comes every single day, right at the end of davening before we say Aleinu. It says, V'chol banayich lumudei Hashem, v'rav shalom banayich. A very beautiful verse, and saying, and all of your children will be students of God, and your children will have much peace. Again, these are all not just consolation, but prophecies of the future. And in the future, it's saying that actually later in Rambam, quoting Isaiah, says that when Mashiach comes, the employment of the whole world, the occupation of the whole world will be to know God. So here it says, all of your children will study God, will study God's ways and His Torah, and there'll be much peace. So this is the source of it. And like I said, in Nusach Sfard, we say this every day right before Aleinu. Another verse here, which is very well known, it's the first verse of the 55th chapter, says, Hoi, called Sameh Lechu L'mayim, Asher Ein Lo Kesef, Lechu Shivru V'Achlu, U'Lechu Shivru B'Lo Kesef, U'B'Lo Machir Yayin V'Chalav. Here it says, Hoi, behold, all who are thirsty, let them come to the water, and anyone who has no money, go and purchase, possess, eat, and drink without payment, without a price, wine and milk. So it's not clear what it's saying. You could say it's in Messianic era, nothing will cost anyone any money. But that's not how it's understood, because we know the principle that we've mentioned many times, Ein Mayim Ela Torah. any time in the Tanakh that it mentions water, it could mean just regular water, but it also will always be a hint or an allusion to Torah itself. So the way that this is interpreted by everyone is who is thirsty, let them go to the Torah. You want your thirst quenched? Torah is what will quench your thirst, and you don't need money for it. Anyone can purchase, anyone can learn, anyone can be part of the water of Torah. And then at the end, it says, without any price, you can come to possess wine and milk. And in different verses and different prophecies, many times the Torah itself is compared to either wine or milk. Wine, for sure, because wine, yayin, is gematria, 70. And this is the phrase, nichnas yayin yotze sod. When wine comes in, the secret comes out. And of course, there are 70 faces to the Torah. So yayin, wine, equals 70, the 70 faces to the Torah. And chalav, milk, because it's white. This is one of the reasons that we have milk products on Shavuos. So on Shavuos, we receive the Torah. And Torah is sometimes, milk is used as a metaphor for Torah because it's white and it's pure. So here we see it all in this verse. It's a very, very, very important verse. And then, one second. And then, right at the end, it says, Hatu aznechem ulechu elai, shimu utechi nafshechem, v'yakrata lechem brit olam chasdei David hanemanim. So here it says, all of you, listen to my words. This is the prophet, God speaking through the prophet. Listen to my words and come to me. Listen and your souls will live. And I will make a covenant with you, an everlasting covenant. The kindnesses of David, my faithful one. Or like this covenant that God is saying that he will make with the Jewish people is similar to the covenant he made with David. He made a covenant with David that his lineage would be kings forever until Mashiach ben David. And so God is saying, I will make a covenant with you just like I made with David. And it's called here the enduring kindnesses that were promised to David. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is I have a personal story with this is among the lost track, let's say 160 volumes of Rav Ginsburg's books. He put out it's in 5 books, but each book has two books. So there's really actually 11 books within these 5 sets. And what it is one of the best explanations of the structure of the Arizal's teaching was in a sefer called Chazdei David HaNemanim. From this verse, And this person wrote this explanation of the teachings of the Arizal. It's relatively short, but it like brings the whole like structure of the Arizal. And so Rav Ginsburg, over a year or two, went through this book, Chazdei, David, and Nemanim, and the result of these lectures were these really 11 volumes. They come to over 3,000 pages. So, look, this is a personal story, is that I was up in Tzfat. We go up there every year, and we always go to Meron, where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. And I always go there and pray. And since we're at the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, so I'm praying to Hashem that I could be privileged to understand the secrets of the Torah, especially the ones that came through Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And of course, the Arizal is based in, is buried in Tzfat. And according to many, the Arizal was the Gilgul, the reincarnation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And so when I'm praying there, I had this set of books. I didn't merit to be at these lectures, but I had this set of books, and I had never really had time to open them. And I had this like clear flash that you want to understand the secrets of the Torah, so learn this set of books. And so I remember I got on the phone and I called Rav Ginsburg, and I told him about this kind of clear flash that I had, and I did it. It took me, I believe it was about a year and a half, and I learned approximately, somewhere between a year and a half, I learned approximately 8 to 10 pages every day. That was my Seder of learning. That was my schedule of learning. And I made it through the whole thing. So here, when I was preparing the Haftarah, and here I see Chazdei, David, and Nemanim. So we should all merit. God is saying that, in other words, just like I made an eternal covenant with David, I also have an eternal covenant with the Jewish people. But in the beginning of the verse, it says, like, open your ears and come to me and listen, and your souls will live. So may we merit to be connected to the Torah, the secrets of the Torah, and through them, may we really, really live.